Welcome to Passive Curiosity in an AI world where we explore tomorrow's careers through the lens of AI. A 17-year-old boy had never been arrested, never charged with anything, never convicted of anything. But he was in a secret intelligence file maintained by his county sheriff office, flagged as likely to become a criminal, because an algorithm said so.
Officers were showing up at his door. His school was watching him, and he had no idea why.
This case was investigated by one of our guests this quarter, and when the community found out, 17,000 kids had their data in that system. Hundreds had secret dossiers. Some were placed in involuntary psychiatric detention for up to 72 hours without their parents being told.
Over the last several months, Acadia sat down with 6 people working at the place where AI meets power. A surveillance attorney who argued before the Supreme Court and won. A labor scholar who proved that 2 workers doing the exact same ride can be paid completely different amounts. A legal technologist building deep fake detectors for courtrooms. A UCLA professor who has spent decades asking whose values actually get built into the platforms billions of people use every day. A civil rights attorney who investigated that school surveillance program. And a legal entrepreneur who is rebuilding how lawyers work from the ground up. I'm Alora.
And I'm Acadia. And this is the AI Empower Law and Civic Life Miniseries recap.
Before we get into the guests, give me the honest version. What's actually happening?
Every institution that governs your life, courts, employers, schools, law enforcement, the platforms you use every day, is now running some form of algorithmic decision making. And most of the legal framework that are supposed to protect you were written before any of this existed.
Which means there's a gap.
A real one. And what struck me across all 6 conversations is that none of these guests are anti-technology. Every single one said the problem isn't the tool, it's the absence of accountability around that tool. Nathan Fried-Wessler made a point, one that reframes everything that follows.
There's just practical impediments that meant it was very hard to violate lots of people's privacy at scale. Of course, there have been terrible abuses of police power throughout this country's history, so I'm not trying to minimize that, but it was very hard to do it in a kind of truly dragnet way. Now, these digital age technologies mean that police can collect those kinds of details on a person's life and so much more, literally at the press of a button.
So what changed isn't the government's desire to watch people. It's the cost.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Carpenter.
The Supreme Court had to decide, does the government need a warrant before accessing your cell phone location history? Before that ruling, the government said no, because the data is held by a third party. You have no constitutional protection. Nathan's argument, which the court accepted, was that the rule cannot survive in the digital age. You cannot opt out of a phone. And once that location data exists, it maps everything. But winning one case doesn't close that door.
And law enforcement agencies have realized that in the aftermath of the Carpenter decision that makes them go to a judge if they want to go to the cell phone company, maybe they can get around that by going and paying money instead of going to a judge. And so that's a problem that we're now dealing with. And in fact, we've seen at the federal level, the Department of Homeland Security, particularly ICE, re-upping its purchase of access to that kind of location information without getting warrants. Just this week, the director of the FBI revealed that the FBI is again buying access to that information, something it had stopped doing a couple of years ago.
Same data, different route, no warrant.
And that's the pattern across the entire episode. The law moves slowly, the technology doesn't. Your face is being tracked by networks of cameras paired with facial recognition. The technology gets it wrong more often for darker skinned people, women, and those who are younger and older. We've documented at least a dozen wrongful arrests of innocent people who matched a facial recognition result.
Episode 2 shifted to something many of our listeners are probably already living: gig work.
Vina Duval coined the term algorithmic wage discrimination. 2 drivers, same platform, same ride offered, different pay.
Algorithmic wage discrimination is the idea that different people can get different wages for the exact same work based on an algorithmic determination of how much they should earn. Traditionally, because of the women's movement and because of the labor movement, we have this concept of equal pay for equal work. If I'm doing the exact same thing as you at the same time and with the same skill, in theory, we should earn the exact same amount of money. What algorithmic wage discrimination does is completely disrupt the idea that wages should be predictable and knowable and negotiated over between an employer and an employee, and simultaneously disrupts the idea that we have equal pay for equal work. For an Uber driver, for example, how much they earn from hour to hour is unknowable to them, and their wages, the price that they are given, the labor price that they're given for each ride that they do, is unique to them. You and I could be offered the same ride, and we will be given completely different amounts.
And there's no law that stops that.
These workers are classified as independent contractors, which means they fall outside the safety net the labor movement spent a century building. No minimum wage protection, no unemployment insurance, no right to organize collectively.
Episode 3 moved into the courtroom, and into a problem most people haven't started thinking about yet.
Maura Grossman is building a deepfake detector specifically for use in courts. The nightmare scenario she is trying to prevent isn't theoretical.
Somebody goes into court, family court, and they say, my husband's abusing me and the kids. I have an audio tape of him on my phone threatening to lock us in the trunk and to drive the car into the lake. I want you to give me sole custody of the kids and a protective order that he can't come within 1,000 feet of any of us. Here, Judge, let me play you the tape. Now, how is that judge supposed to have any idea whether that tape is real or not real? Because the technology today is so good that it's almost impossible to tell if that's real or not.
And she said generating that audio would take minutes for free.
You have enough of her voice from a single conversation to clone it convincingly. She does a test in her talks. Shows audience 10 images, 5 real, 5 fake. No one does better than chance. 50-50. We are already there.
Episode 4 pulled us back to the biggest frame of the quarter.
Ramesh Srinivasan, founder of the Digital Cultural Lab. He's traveled to nearly 80 countries asking communities what they actually want from technology. His central question is, whose values get built into these platforms?
There's no such thing as neutral. I mean, anything and everything is conditioned based on how we choose to see the world, or how a technology, quote unquote, chooses, or its designer or the engineer who builds a learning algorithm chooses to order information.
2 people sitting next to each other, same age, same place, can be living in entirely non-overlapping realities.
And you can't have a democracy where there's no shared ground. He connects that to the rise of authoritarian policy government, not as a partisan claim, but as what happens when algorithmic fragmentation breaks shared reality. He also asked these communities what they wanted from technology, and their answer?
I don't know if Silicon Valley expects it or not, or cares about it or not, but most people just want to live a life of basic dignity, you know?
to live a life of basic human dignity.
Episode 5 brought us back to where we started.
Clarence Oka is a civil rights attorney who investigated that school predictive policing program. The sheriff's office was taking data from schools, grades, attendance, abuse history, and feeding it into an algorithm to predict which kids would become criminals.
They were taking the most sensitive information about a child's life, their grades, they were looking at attendance records, whether or not they had been abused as children, whether or not they had been themselves a victim of crime, looking at all of this information, taking it together, feeding that data to an algorithm in the sheriff's office to make predictions about which kids were likely to develop into criminals. We found that over 17,000 kids in this community had their data accessed by law enforcement, and that there were hundreds of kids that had secret intelligence dossiers.
And the kids being flagged were the ones who had already been failed by the systems.
The same systems that hadn't protected them were now using that history against them. When the community found out, everyone came together. Teachers, parents, advocates, and they successfully fought the program. When I asked him what the problem with this program was, he gave this analogy.
And you're policing them, criminalizing them, punishing them, surveilling them before they commit the crime. That goes against every notion of fairness that we have, right? To simplify it, imagine you come home one day on a Monday and your parents like you're grounded. And you're like, well, what did I do? I think you might do something on Thursday, so I'm gonna go ahead and preemptively ground you now, even though you haven't done anything wrong, because I know the last couple of weeks you've been acting up. That is so unfair and unjust, right? If a parent does it, so imagine what happens when law enforcement or courts or schools do that, right?
Episode 6 was different. Jennifer Leonard isn't litigating cases. She's working on the institution of law itself.
But what struck me most was the tension between what Maura Grossman and Jennifer Leonard said about the future of the profession itself.
Maura raised the deepest question first.
The first question is, will we still have a courtroom with judges and juries? Because maybe we just submit the dispute to an algorithm that can look at all the cases from the last 50 years and make a prediction, and we don't even need to have the judge.
That's the scary version. Do we even need lawyers if the machine can do it all?
But Jennifer Leonard answered that directly, and her answer was different.
I think AI will replace some lawyers, but I actually think that the number of lawyers could stay the same or grow for a few different reasons. One is our system of justice and system of laws is so badly constructed that right now lawyers are only addressing a little under 10% of the total civil legal needs of the American population.
So Jennifer's saying there's not less room for lawyers. There's more. The work changes, but the need grows. That should be reassuring.
Except Maura added something else. Something honest.
I'm teaching law school this semester, and my students ask me, am I going to get a job? Is it going to look the same? Am I going to have a career 5 years from now with all this generative AI? And to be really honest with you, it's the first time that I can't really give you a good answer to that question because none of us know.
So Jennifer's right. There's opportunity. But Maura's also right. It's genuinely unclear what that looks like.
Both things are true. And that's the real situation for anyone entering this field right now. Excitement and uncertainty at the same time. Let's talk about careers, because I think that's where most people have the biggest blind spot about this field.
What do you mean?
Clarence Oka said directly, "A lot of jobs I've done didn't exist when I was a kid." That's true for nearly everyone we've talked to this quarter. The field moves faster than the training pipelines, which means the people doing this work are the ones who are already curious about two different things at once, and found the place where they crossed.
And that's still happening right now.
AI Policy Council, algorithmic auditor, legal AI strategist, those roles barely existed 5 years ago. Nobody planned for them at 17. Which means fields are being defined right now that will be fully established by the time students in high school today reach mid-career.
Let's go through the guests, because how they got there matters as much as where they ended up. None of these paths were straight.
Nathan Friedwessler, not sure about law school, took a job as a field organizer at the ACLU, watched lawyers in courtrooms, went to law school planning post 9/11 cases. There wasn't a permanent job in that area when his fellowship ended, took an opening in speech, privacy, and technology, political science major, no technical background.
Vina Dubal,
International Relations and Feminist Studies at Stanford, public interest attorney representing taxi workers in San Francisco. Went back for a PhD, started her fieldwork in 2012, just as Uber and Lyft were launching. Watched the whole model unfold. She followed the workers she was already studying.
Maura Grossman,
Clinical psychologist for close to a decade. In her 30s, went back to law school full-time. Became a litigator at a major New York firm. Started working on technology-assisted document review because the firm had cases with millions of emails. Met a Canadian, moved to Waterloo. Ended up teaching law and ethics to computer science students because no one else was asking the right questions.
Ramesh Srinivasan,
He is a perfect example for this conversation. He studied engineering at Stanford, but was shaped just as much by music, hip-hop, punk, activism. He was a college radio DJ. Then he worked at an AI startup in Amsterdam right after graduation. That trip through India along the Silk Road, traveling for months with nothing but cassette tapes and film, informed everything he studies now. Not what algorithms can do, what they do to culture, democracy, to the experience of being human when the world is filtered through code.
Clarence Oka,
Said in 4th grade he wanted to be both the head of NASA and a Supreme Court justice. His teacher told him he couldn't do both. But he was a stubborn child and made it work, the spirit of both. Civil rights attorney, focused on AI and emerging technology.
and Jennifer Leonard,
Came out of college in the late 90s when liberal arts majors were going to law school. Found it stressful. Went to the City of Philadelphia's law department. Went back to Penn Law to build their first professional development program. Became chief innovation officer. Left after COVID to start her own company. She wishes someone had told her, "Don't be afraid to take risks." Her generation of lawyers stayed in the job they didn't love because changing felt too dangerous.
and spend time talking to people who aren't lawyers. If you stay in any bubble, you get a warped picture. There's something that connects all 6 of these paths.
They all found the crossing point between two things.
Nathan is an organizer who became a constitutional lawyer. Vina is a legal historian who became a labor researcher. Maura is a psychologist who became a legal technologist. Ramesh is an engineer who became a cultural critic. Clarence is a lawyer who thinks in art and community organizing. Jennifer is a litigator who became an entrepreneur. None of them are just one thing, and the reason they're valuable is precisely because they're not.
Don't prune your interest too early. The combination that feels random right now might be exactly what makes you irreplaceable later.
Concrete skills. What do you actually need to build?
Nathan Wessler said the ability to sit still and read for long hours. Most of his days are legal research and writing. The skill that enables everything else is the capacity to stay focused.
Vina Dubal said writing, and she said it with urgency.
And so writing is not just like output, right? It's not just like you need it to write an essay, and so you ask ChatGPT to write an essay, and then you have an essay. It's actually, it's self a process that helps you to think critically in a way that is quite useful for policy, for teaching, for organizing. And so I think one skill that I think is just so critical that I'm very concerned people don't have the desire to cultivate is writing and rewriting.
Writing is itself a process that helps you think critically in a way that is quite useful for policy, for teaching, for organizing.
Maura Grossman said flexibility. Most people are rigid. The people who can deal with change are going to do very well.
Clarence Oka said creativity, and specifically art.
Art has this really powerful ability to bridge the reality of injustice with advocacy to respond to it. I have seen that up close and personal. I'm a co-founder of the Notice Coalition, which stands for No Tech Criminalization in Education. It's a national network of researchers, advocates, and organizers who are fighting to end youth surveillance and algorithmic injustice in schools. And one of the things that we have done in recent years, we've had an artist in residency program and we've done a community fellowship program. And both of those have produced amazing art, visual art, performance art, storytelling, like all these different artistic tools. And I have seen how when communities engage with that art, all of a sudden the issues make sense. We have, for example, a group of community fellows who put on a giant puppet show, like these massive puppets, life-size puppets, to tell the story of surveillance in schools and how does it impact young people. And I was blown away at how we had done all of this research and talking at a conference and people were kind of getting it, but not really. And they sat down and watched that puppet show and the light bulbs, you could just see it going off one after the other. And everybody really understood what was at stake.
Jennifer Leonard said systems thinking and metacognition, knowing how you learn best.
And Ramesh Srinivasan said something that sounds simple, but is the hardest of all.
Just encourage everybody and anybody to keep their eyes open and explore and be curious and look widely, look beyond, look in between. Do not give into the polarization of cancel culture. Do not give into these things where you're like, you look like this, or you talk with this accent, so I'm just going to dehumanize you. This is a big trap. So we can do so much better. And so I personally am very dedicated to being in dialogue and support of any and all movements and figures who stand for that.
Not as a resume line, as a real practice of breaking the assumptions you didn't know you had.
None of these are narrow technical skills. Reading, writing, flexibility, creativity, systems thinking, perspective. The tools are changing too fast for any specific technical skill to be the whole answer. What doesn't change is the ability to understand why something works, communicate it clearly, and see how it connects to a larger system.
I want to name something before we get to the action piece. The gap between who these systems harm and who has the power to change them.
The communities most affected by predictive policing, by algorithmic wage discrimination, by biased hiring tools, these communities are not the ones building these systems. And the legal tools that exist to challenge the harms were written for a different era.
The laws lag, the institutions lag, the technology doesn't.
And yet every guest is still in the fight.
Concrete. What do you actually do if this quarter has sparked something?
Clarence Oka said, reach out to local researchers and advocators. If there's a fight in your community over surveillance in schools, over algorithmic tools in your hospital or your courts, that is an entry point. People doing this work are often looking for help. You don't need credentials. You need to show up and ask.
Nathan Wessler pointed to the ACLU's Free Future blog, regular post on the most pressing questions of privacy and digital rights.
Vina Dubal said, go to labor notes, read the publications, listen to the podcasts.
Jennifer Leonard said, network outside your bubble. Find someone doing something genuinely different and ask how they got there.
And Ramesh Srinivasan, who said studying abroad changed everything for him.
Just go study abroad. It's a great thing to do. Do independent research so you can actually explore things more deeply. And often universities have money, even these days with the attacks on universities by the Trump administration. A lot of universities have the money to fund independent research and things like that. You know, in my case, what blew my mind and opened me up was moving to Amsterdam, traveling around India when I was like 20 years old. And then the big thing that changed my life is I had gotten into MIT for graduate school. I had this job in Amsterdam that I mentioned. I traveled all the way from Amsterdam to Western China, backpacking with cassette tapes and physical film for 6 months almost. And then I traveling on the Silk Road, and that just blew my mind, you know.
That's not about tourism. That's about breaking your default assumptions. I want to end with something Nathan Fried Wessler said that I've been sitting with since episode 1.
Tell me.
He was talking about what the next 10 to 20 years look like if nothing changes. A world where our digital lives are fully mapped with no safeguards. And he said,
that is not the future that we need to walk into. And there's a lot of work going on now to avoid that future. We can do a few things to avoid that future. One, of course, is to make our voices heard to lawmakers and the people setting policy.
We spent a quarter listening to 6 people doing exactly that work every day in courtrooms, in classrooms, in community meetings, in code.
The legal frameworks for the AI era are being written right now. The tools that courts will use are being designed right now. The policy decisions are being made right now.
By people, which means students who are curious, have a place in this. This has been Paths of Curiosity in an AI world. I'm Acadia.
And I'm Alora. Until next time, stay curious.